Hello, my name is Julie, and it's time to talk about the 12 books I read in March. After having two very good first 2 months of the year with average ratings of over 4.0, oh how the mighty have fallen. We have gotten to below my normal average rating for this month, so I have a lot of books that I have to talk about that I feel complicated about or middle of the road, but there are still a couple in here that I highly recommend. So there's still some exciting stuff to talk about. Let's talk my stats. As I mentioned before, I had read 12 books in March, and that is the most books that I have read in a month in 2025 so far. Yay. And I read a total of 4,271 pages. I had an average rating of a 3.45, which is kind of low. We'll talk about why that is later. I had no books that at this moment I am giving a full 5-star, but there are some contenders because I always want to make a very informed decision about that. Average page count was 355 and page per day was 137. I read 6 books from my own TBR. However, I also acquired 6 books for my TBR. Partially that is because I was trying to use up my Audible credits because I am going to be switching over to Libro.fm, which supports independent bookstores instead of Amazon. So I had to actually get rid of the credits I had already paid for, so I just bought a bunch of books. So we are still at an annual net TBR shelf of -3, which is great to see. And as for my star ratings, we have a lot of 3 stars. That's okay. We have our first 2 stars of the year, and we have 2 books that I gave a no rating. And both of those I would give probably above a 4 normally, so I do think my average rating should be a little bit higher than a 3.45, but I don't really feel right assigning star ratings to those nonfictions, and we'll talk about it. Talking about my pie charts, man, I read every genre imaginable, but the largest chunk was 3 fantasy books. For series standing, I started 2 series, but I finished 2 series as well, which is very exciting, and the rest were standalones. 5 of the books that I read were on audiobook, which is 1 higher than my average of usually doing about 1/3 of my books on audio. And then 50% of the books I read were from authors that were new to me, and the other 50% was from authors that I have read from before. So let's start with the first book I read this month, which was Olga Dies Dreaming by Xochitl Gonzalez. This is a general fiction that follows 2 siblings, Olga and Pietro. They are in their 30s in New York. They are from a Puerto Rican family, and their parents were both revolutionaries in Puerto Rico. They lost their father to addiction, and their mother left them when they were teenagers to go back to join the revolution. And the 2 of them now are sort of in positions of power. Olga is a wedding planner of the 1%, and Pietro is a local candidate who is, I believe, working in Washington, D.C. at this point. And the 2 of them are starting to realize how putting themselves around privileged white people has sort of changed their behavior and how people are still being taken advantage of. I picked this book up on a total whim. I decided to go to my library with nothing in mind, and I just picked out like 20 or so books that I had vaguely heard of before, read the first chapter and see what grabbed me, and this was one of the ones that really grabbed me in a way that felt hard to pinpoint because the first chapter wasn't that incredibly exciting. I think it was just the way that it was presenting this idea. I think that the main selling point of this book is the characters. We're mostly following Olga, but occasionally we're following other people, and it's just the complicated landscape of their minds, of the different things that they have coming together to form one person. This is also taking place around Hurricane Maria, so it takes place in the couple of years beforehand, during, and just after. As one of our main characters is a politician, he is actively having to deal with some of the causes that made Hurricane Maria so awful in Puerto Rico. And I think that this book does a very good job of painting these characters as real people, and I was very engaged for a good portion of it. And as the book went on, the plot felt less grounded. I kind of wish the plot of this book had kind of gone in a different direction towards the end of it. There were some parts that I really liked that were about personal journeys of our main characters, confronting things about their parents. So I think I'm giving this a 3.5. Then I read Erasure by Percival Everett. So I found out about this book because I saw the trailer for American Fiction. I thought that it looked really good and like something I wanted to see. And then like a couple months later, I found out it was based on a book by Percival Everett, who is an author that I have on my TBR. And so I was like, oh, this is a perfect opportunity. Got it from my library and listened to the audiobook. This is about our main character, Monk, who is a author. He is a black man. He writes really erudite fiction. His books do not sell that well. And he also has a lot of people wanting him to write something more approachable or about the black experience. Then a couple of tragedies line up in his family and he is strapped for cash. So he ends up writing a book that is what the white people want. It's about a young black man living in the ghetto and going around and assaulting women, being violent against other people. He writes this book knowing that it is exploitative and it is purposefully pulling on racist stereotypes. And suddenly this book starts to do very well. So I did listen to the audiobook, as I mentioned. I don't think that that would be my first recommendation. I'd probably say go for print first, but I wouldn't rule out the audiobook. There are different sections in between chapters in which he has these different conversations between famous people, and I found those were hard to follow with the audiobook personally, but otherwise I thought it was fine. A good amount of this book is about the personal experience of Monk and some things in his childhood. He's trying to grapple with some stuff with his parents and his siblings, and just the way that he has been told his whole life that he's not black enough because he doesn't line up with what society expects of a black man. Somehow he is not black. And then there's also the parts where he is going out of his way to make this book happen so that he can get the money. I would have loved if more of this book focused on either of those things rather than having a third of the book be this book within a book. I would have loved to have a little bit more resolution with what is going to happen with the satire plot. But I think the themes of this book about what we expect out of works of people from marginalized communities was great. The structure of it worked less for me, so I think I'm giving this like a 3.75 or a 4. Then I read The Message by Ta-Nehisi Coates. This is a short nonfiction, very short, that is about the author's experience going to Palestine. However, the first half to 2/3 of this book don't have anything to do with Palestine until he actually visits, and you see how all the things he talked about earlier relate to how he experienced Palestine. Ta-Nehisi Coates years ago wrote an article in The Atlantic that was the case for reparations of American slavery, and he had cited Israel as an example of something happening in the real world of like, oh, people have already done this. He knew that there was conflict between Israel and Palestine, and he did not really know the whole story behind it. And he knew that people that he looked up to, like Malcolm X, were pro-Palestine, but he didn't really do his due diligence about what he was talking about. He talks about that. He talks about a couple of other things, like his own experience in education and his experience having written books about discrimination against Black people. And then he was invited to go to Palestine for a book or writers conference. They were discussing his book Between the World and Me, which I have read and absolutely loved. And while he was there, he was seeing what an apartheid state Israel has made of Palestine. These people were relating to his own story about how Black people are often treated as second-class citizens in America, and he was seeing people literally being second-class citizens in Palestine. This book is very short. It is in no way a comprehensive history of what's going on in Gaza. It is more seeing an American's personal experience and how that shifted when they actually got their feet on the ground. I think that this book is doing exactly what it set out to do. I could have done with this book being even longer, if I'm honest with you. Maybe I should have slowed down the audiobook, but I think that this book is really going to make a lot of change in the world. So I'm very glad it's out there. I don't feel right rating this book because I do think it's very good. If you forced me to, it'd be in the 4 and the 5. I just don't know where I want to put it when I was like, yeah, I would have liked it to be longer. But I think he did what he set out to do, and I highly recommend this nonfiction. Then I read The Teeth of Dawn by Marina Lostetter. This is the 3rd in the 5 Penalty series, and this cover is very shiny, so I'm going to try to keep it in a position where you can actually see the cover. This finished copy was sent to me by the publisher, so thank you so much to Tor. This is a high urban-y fantasy / horror series. The first book, The Helm of Midnight, was one of my favorite books that I read, I want to say in 2022. I read the sequel the second it came out. I thought it was okay. And so I was a little bit hesitant going into this third book, but I do think that this book was an improvement on the second book. In this world, there are 5 different gods. This is also a queer norm world, and all of the different gods have a different set of pronouns, which I think is very cool representation. The different gods are of time, secrets, emotion, knowledge, and nature. And all 5 of these things are actually currency in this world. Like, you can extract time or emotion from someone's actual body. There is another thing in this world where you can, after someone has died, imbue their spirit into a mask, and someone who wears that mask can then access that person's greatest talent. And in the first book, a notorious serial killer's mask has been stolen, and we're following 3 perspectives. One person who is trying to hunt down the mask. Second, somebody who came in contact with the mask in the past. Third, the serial killer who has died. I think this series is such a fun blend of fantasy and horror. The first book is kind of like a serial killer horror book, and the other 2 books have done horror in different ways, and I thought that the way that this integrated horror into it, having a little bit of body horror in there, I thought was fun. The thing that I really loved about this book is the new perspectives that were added. There's so much like new world building stuff of getting answers about this world in this book that I thought were so much fun, and in fact I liked those new perspectives better than I liked the old perspectives. Hi, Editing Julie here. I just wanted to put in one note that I felt like I didn't actually do my critiques of the book very well in this, so I just wanted to say, I think that this book spent too much time on the fascinating world building aspects of like how this world came to be, that it took away from the arcs of our already established main characters. And I was put to sleep by the perspectives that we had. There was a huge time gap between book 2 and book 3, and it's like, how did we get here? And then suddenly things are easy for the main characters. So the thing that was really propelling me here was that new perspective that I thought was so fascinating. Kind of forgot to mention the downsides. I just thought that this was such a really creative fantasy series that way more people need to be giving a try. Oh, and I'm giving this probably another like 3.75 or 4. Then we have The Gilded Ones by Namina Forna. My book club, 3 of Clubs, read this for our quarter, in which we read 3 different African myth retelling inspired books. The Gilded Ones is the first book in a YA fantasy series about a world in which sometimes girls at about 15, suddenly their blood turns gold, and those people are considered impure and are killed. And our main character, it turns out, has the gold blood, and she is so devastated by this. She just wants them to kill her. But not only can she not die, she also is recruited to be in an army that they are now forming of these gold-blooded people for the emperor to kill off these monsters that are taking over the world. I know YA is not really my thing anymore. I'm getting older, I'm no longer the target demographic, and maybe I shouldn't be rating YA books so harshly. However, I think that the author is talking down to the reader with this book. I think that the writing is so bad. It's so not good. If this book had not been voted on for the book club, I would have put it back onto the shelf after maybe a page. The author does not trust you to remember information that she has given to you on the very same page. Everything's very redundant, where it would be like someone would say a new piece of information and then the main character would think, I don't know anything about that. That's so confusing. What are they talking about? And then she would say out loud, what are you talking about? What am I talking about? I'm talking about this. Like, I understand that adults are writing YA and they're writing to a younger audience, but I think there's a difference between writing to a younger audience and talking down to your reader. I just don't think they match up, the reading level and the content of the book. I think that the themes of this book that are talking about feminism and stuff like that, and how harmful the patriarchy is, I think those are good. But another problem I had with it was that the author has a character who acts one way for about 100 pages, and then she skips a time jump, and suddenly the character acts like an entirely different person, and we don't even get to see that character growth, which I feel like most authors, they would have made that character growth be the plot of the first book. The way that this was written felt insulting. I think if I was a teenager, I would have felt the same way. So this was an easy 2-star, if that, and I will definitely not be continuing on in the series. If you would like to join my book club in April, May, and June, we are going to be reading books about books and writers. And the book we're going to be reading in April is Writers and Lovers by Lily King. That link is in the description if you want to join us. Then I read Sula by Toni Morrison. This is mostly about two girls, Nell and Sula, as they grew up in the same town in very different households. They became best friends when they were children. We see their families in the past and how their families came to be. We see their childhood together, and we also see them as adults when they have grown apart and even betrayed each other. I read The Bluest Eye last year and I absolutely adored it. It was one of my favorite books of the year last year. And I have read Beloved, which I really enjoyed, but I had a bad reading experience with, so I am hoping one day to reread. So I was like, let's try out a new Toni Morrison this year, and that was Sula. First off, Toni Morrison's writing simply cannot be beat. The way that she turns a sentence, the way that she can just get to the core of a person so fast. She's just so singular in the way that she writes stuff. I did pull a quote. For the second time, a quote in like the last chapter of a Toni Morrison book killed me. I sure did live in this world. Really? What have you got to show for it? Show? To who? I got my mind and what goes on in it, which is to say I got me. Lonely, ain't it? Yes, but my lonely is mine. Now your lonely is somebody else's, made by somebody else and handed to you. Ain't that something? A secondhand lonely. She got the Pulitzer for a reason. I think of the plots of Toni Morrison's books, this has been my least favorite. The way that Toni Morrison usually writes is that there will be the plot of what's happening, but most of the time we're like skipping back and forth to flashbacks of what has happened in the past that has like informed the present. What happened in this book is we're skipping around a lot in the time of Nell and Sula, and that is something that often works less for me. I think it grounds me less in the story, but of course there is still so much very good to get out of this. These characters are very complex, and we see dualities within them of them not adhering to one sort of character archetype. We get to see the differences between these different families and how, even though these girls are best friends, they have been trained to act entirely differently when the same thing happens. There were some moments that I teared up here too. I love Sula as she is a character that people have like pinned all the bad things in their world on, and she is a free spirit. She's doing whatever she wants to do despite if it matches up with people's morals or not, and there are some things that she does that are hurtful and wrong, but she's still such a strong character that you empathize with. So I think I'm giving this at this moment like a 4.25. Then very differently, I listened to Dungeon Crawler Carl by Matt Dinneman. This is a lit RPG. This is my very first lit RPG. And if you are not familiar with that, that is a book in which someone gets sucked into a video game or video game-like situation in which they are like fighting their way out of stuff, but they can see their own stats. And the whole idea is that they are trying to level themselves up. In Dungeon Crawler Carl, Carl is a normal guy who ends up being just in the right place in the right time when aliens end up killing most of the people on Earth and start this subterranean dungeon that all of the survivors of Earth have to go into. And this dungeon crawl is being televised to the entire universe. Carl is fighting alongside his ex-girlfriend's cat, and he like is not equipped to be doing all of these things, and he's have to fight off goblins and other weird creatures. This book is like if The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and The Hunger Games had a video game baby. And I thought it was so much fun. I did not want to stop listening to the audiobook. I think the performance was great. This is an Audible original, but there is a company that is making a graphic audio that is not exclusive to Audible. They are currently working on book 2, I think. I thought that our characters were so fun, and I love how the world building is going. And I think that this is having an interesting tone of being so comedic, but addressing like how horrifying the situation that they're in is, and subtly starting to talk about the corrupt politics that are making this show even possible. So I'm really liking where the series is going. And because this is set up to be as if it is a video game, it felt so natural that this book is going to have a ton of sequels because, you know, a normal video game, if you don't do any side quests, is like 60 hours. And I listened to 13 hours of an audiobook on 2-speed. So I listened to 7 hours of an audiobook. And I'm like, well, where's the rest of my hours? Where's my 60 hours? So I am very excited to continue on in this series, and I am going to be borrowing some copies from friends to continue reading this. Then I read The Last Session by Julia Bartz. This was kindly sent to me by the publisher, so thank you to Atria and Emily Bessler Books for sending this to me. This is the author of The Writing Retreat, which was one of my favorite books of, I want to say, 2023. This is about our main character, Thea, who is a social worker working in a psych ward. A woman ends up showing up to the psych ward in a catatonic state for a couple of days, and our main character ends up realizing that she has this connection to the woman. The woman wakes up and then abruptly leaves in a strange situation, and our main character is very concerned about that and finds out that she might have had some sort of connection to this relationship therapy cult that is happening in the desert in the middle of nowhere. And our main character decides to drop everything and go on one of the retreats that these relationship therapists have to see if this woman might be there. So Julia Bartz is actually a trained therapist. So some of the talk about psychology and therapy in this is very much based on her own experience in the field. I want to say I could not put this book down. I was absolutely tearing through the pages. Julia Bartz knows how to pace a book to make you just want to pick up the next chapter. I think that this book is actually leaning more in the horror direction than the previous book did, and I don't think it's really being advertised that way. The thing that this reminded me of most is that it kind of had Midsummer vibes, except Midsummer is much better. I don't want to spoil anything at all, so I'm going to try to be very, very vague. My main problem with this book is that there was a direction in which I thought this book was setting up going, and we never get answers in that direction. And I thought that that was kind of unsatisfying and didn't seem to be matching with what this book was like promising to do. I also had moments here or there where I thought the dialogue felt kind of stilted. I just had a ton of fun with this, even if the resolution isn't exactly what I wanted. So I'm giving this a 3.5 star, and this is on sale now if you'd like to get your own copy. Speaking of being on sale now, Everything is Tuberculosis by John Green in bookstores now. Go buy it. I am a huge nerd fighter, and I have been following John's journey about tuberculosis over the last several years, so I have been highly, highly anticipating Everything is Tuberculosis. Let's get the signature. I believe this is Berry. When I compare this to Berry and Firecracker, when you have a bright light on this, I think this is Berry. But this is a short nonfiction about how we as humanity have let the world's deadliest infection stay around, even though we have had the cure for it since the 1950s. This is part science, part history, and part personal narrative, as John talks about a boy that he met when he was visiting Sierra Leone named Henry, who had tuberculosis. And so John is talking about the personal history of Henry and his mother Isatu, as well as the history of tuberculosis, how he discovered what it was, how the world has been absolutely shaped by it, and how back in the day tuberculosis was a great evening factor. You know, even the rich got tuberculosis and died of it. So many famous poets ended up dying of tuberculosis. But since the 1950s, since we have had the cure, tuberculosis, like most other diseases, has become a disease of poverty. Tuberculosis has been the world's deadliest infectious disease for hundreds of years, with the small blip of COVID for like 2 or 3 years being more than tuberculosis. And it's back to being our #1 deadliest disease. I think the work that John is doing for tuberculosis advocacy is incredible. I think that this book is so great and is going to bring so many more people into the fight to end TB. As a person who has followed every single thing that John has said on the internet about tuberculosis leading up to this book over the last several years, I personally could have used this book being even longer, but this book being this short is going to make it so much more accessible to more readers. I think no matter who you are, you should be picking up this book. The way that he is writing is making it very approachable, the science and the history, and very emotional. I just love John's writing to begin with, so He's doing so much good work here. So I didn't give it a rating because I was like, yeah, I would have liked it to be longer. I would have liked to have a little bit more historical explanation or whatever. So I don't know where I want to give it between a 4 and a 5, but I really did love this and I recommend it to everyone. Then I read one of the oldest books on my TBR, and that is Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. I actually read the first 2/3 of this physically and then ended up reading the last act of it on audiobook, and I do think that is the way to go. I will put whoever the narrator was of the audiobook copy that I listened to on this. I thought that that was a really, really great audiobook that actually enhanced my experience here. But this is about our main character, Pip, who is an orphan who is taken in by his much older sister, who beat him a lot and just doesn't treat him very well. And he has very few people who treat him kindly. And he believes that the way that he can get to be in a place where he's respected and loved is to get rich. And he ends up being given a large fortune, and he starts acting like a total snob because of it. And this is a commentary on the decline of the Victorian upper class and how they were so morally corrupt. I think I've seen that this is one of Charles Dickens' like lower rated books, and I wonder if that is because more people have read it. I think that A Tale of Two Cities might be his most read book, but this is down in like the 3.8s or something. When I was reading the first couple chapters of this book, I was like, oh my god, I love his writing. And I thought it was so approachable, and the way that he was saying certain sentences, I was like, oh, that's such a creative way to say that brings so much like imagery to the eye. I love that. And there were parts that I was like kind of laughing at. And then we get into like the second act, and I was like, oh my god, I don't care. Like, I understand that Pip is being an asshole in the second section and in part of the first section, and I know that that's the point. That doesn't mean I was having a good time. I think I was also missing some of the stuff that was happening in the high society part. I swear to god, I could not stay awake when reading the second part of this book. And then I decided to switch to the audiobook to try to save my reading of this, and I think that that absolutely turned around my reading experience. Yes, like Pip is becoming a kind person again, and also all of these like things are coming full circle, but I also just was comprehending more when I was listening to this on audiobook. I mean, what am I giving this? It's in the range of a 3 because I had such a bad time with section 2, so maybe a 3.5. Then I read Zone 1 by Colson Whitehead. I read this randomly off of my TBR, and I'm glad I did because trust me, I was not going to get to it soon. This is a zombie book by Colson Whitehead, normally a literary fiction author. But this is about our main character who is nicknamed Mark Spitz. He is part of this task force that is sweeping through old buildings in New York and taking out zombies that the military had missed. This takes place over 3 days as him and his squad are sweeping through, and it a lot of times takes place in flashbacks as he is thinking about what has happened since the zombie apocalypse started. And in this world, there is a little bit more technology available. The world and society didn't totally collapse, so there is a little bit of like a government going on, and it's interesting to hear about that. But this book is so overwritten. It made me feel like Colson Whitehead did not know that he was allowed to use a normal word for something. Like, he had to pick something that was on an AP vocabulary list. And behind the writing of it, I thought that this was a fairly plain zombie story. I didn't get a lot out of it. I wasn't really connected to the characters. There are certain vignettes in this that were like really powerful images, but like as a story as a whole, I didn't get a whole lot out of this. I would have wanted like a larger scope. I would have wanted to know more, and I just didn't feel like a lot happened in this book. I just think if you would like to read a book that is pitched this way about zombies, I think you should read Severance by Ling Ma, which I just think did this concept better. So I am giving this, I think I had it at a 2.75. This is Colson Whitehead's worst rated book by a mile. I think this has like a 3.28 or something like that. So I'm not surprised that this wasn't a favorite of mine, and I am absolutely not deterred from reading other Colson Whitehead books. I know that this is a fluke. And the last book that I read this month was As Good as Dead by Holly Jackson. This is the third book in the A Good Girl's Guide to Murder series, which the first book was one of my favorite books of 2024. I read the second one pretty shortly after that, and I liked it, not quite as much. And then this book, I had heard really good things about this. I had heard so many people saying that this was like the best book in the series, and it turns out there are much more mixed reviews about this. This does have the lowest rating in the series. I can't say a lot about what the specific book is about, but after the couple of cases that Pip has solved in the first 2 books, she believes that she has a stalker. And there is also someone who is trying to sue her for defamation. The things I had heard about this book, other than it being the best in the series from people I knew, was also that it was more thriller focused than mystery. And I think that is a good expectation to go into this knowing, because while it kind of starts out the same as the other books do, it definitely pivots and it goes more into a tense thriller. I thought that the thrilling aspects of this book, when there were thriller things happening, I was on the edge of my seat, so stressed out that I just wanted to look up a summary of what was going to happen, because I was so worried that something bad was going to happen, because bad things happen in this book. So I was absolutely invested in like things going the right way in this book, and was just white knuckle. However, I don't think all of the things that happened in this book are very realistic. There are some choices that Pip makes that I think are pretty unfounded. Pip is dealing with a lot of trauma of what has happened in previous books, and that's why she would think that way, but the way that every other person around her just agrees with her doesn't really work for me. So like the reason that I loved book 1 in the series so much was because it was such like an intricately crafted mystery. And so this book didn't necessarily have that, but I think the really high stakes worked for me. So I am going to be giving this book a 4-star, and that is another series that I have finished. So that's great. So those are all the books that I read in March. Please let me know, have you read any of these books? And if so, what you thought? And let me know what you read in March, because I would love to talk about them with you. Are there any books that you read that you think I should read? I'd love to know. If you'd like to find me anywhere else on the internet, you can find me at the several links in the description. And if you would like to keep watching my videos, you can hit that subscribe button. I would love to have you around. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.